basically Ukraine was, and I welcome you to interrupt me and correct me if I get anything wrong here. So I'm going to like summarize the beginning here. So Ukraine was part of the USSR, the United Soviet States, United Soviet
Socialist republics.
Socialist Republic. Yeah, okay. And that was dissolved in 1991. And in 1991, Ukraine became a country, but they still had nukes. And in 1994, Ukraine got with a few different other countries. I saw it was 6 different treaties signed during the Budapest Memorandum in 1994. These agreements sort of varied, but the core of them was denuclearization of Ukraine and security guarantees from their neighbors. So Russia won't attack us if we give our nukes back to Russia. The UK will defend us if anybody attacks us. US will defend us if anybody attacks us. China was sort of wishy-washy on it, but China said they're all supporting it. They're there for it. And so that happened. That was far into the past. And then in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and violated their part of that memorandum, their part of that agreement. And because of that, a war started. This was the beginning of a war between Ukraine and Russia, the Russo-Ukrainian War. And basically, they annexed the territory, and there was no like big thing that came out of that. Like, as far as I was aware, it just sort of like their war started, but there was no following up on those security guarantees from the rest of Europe. Okay, and then we go back a little bit further, and there is a full annexation of these rebel territories on the east coast of Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, on February 21st, 2022. And this was prior to the invasion, if I'm correct, by a few days, 3 days. And basically what was happening is Russia was putting up all of these military units along the border, saying that they were doing special military exercises, and State Department warns it's going to be an invasion. A lot of people are sort of like unsure about it, and then the invasion happens.
Just to jump in there, so
okay,
post the annexation of Crimea, Russia was sponsoring separatist rebel groups with ties to the Russian military in those 2 regions as well. And so portions of those were already de facto under control of Russia when the war began in earnest in 2022.
Okay. And yeah, one thing I also didn't mention is Russia considers the start of the war being Euromaidan and the like kicking out of the last president of Ukraine, who was basically in bed with Putin. You know, he was a collaborator. The Ukrainians kicked him out, and then Russia considered that a hostile.
He lives in Russia now. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to start with one thing that I think is kind of interesting. So this was like the first really big political thing that happened in my adult life. I have a little note. You call it a critical event in your videos. So this is the first critical event that happened in my adult life. And actually, I was working at a grocery store, and this is sort of like the thing that really ignited my interest in politics in general. Sort of like the whole idea that like everything can be normal for a country, and then one day just people are being mass murdered. Just like within a week, normal society, mass murder. And that blew my mind. It kind of like broke a bit of an egg that I had, like protecting myself from the outside world. And I worked at this grocery store, and I actually bought this newspaper. So I have a newspaper that says Russia moves on Ukraine. It's from February 22nd. So this was actually right before the invasion happened in full. But what was really interesting is I'm pretty young. I spent a little bit of time with like leftist socialist YouTubers. One of them is Hassan Abi, and I don't personally watch him, but I was watching people who were talking about him. And unfortunately, a large left-wing leftist, like socialist perspective was that Russia wasn't going to do anything. And that was proven to be just like completely not true at all. And there's a whole argument that is like had between NATO being Western imperialism and Russia being Eastern imperialism. Sort of an aside, I just kind of wanted to add that in there. What were your biggest impressions during the 2022 invasion?
I remember, and these are just sort of holistic personal impressions, is that when I saw that one of the first initial things the Russians did was to force land a bunch of troops at the airport in Kyiv. And there were reporters there, and they were showing these Russian troops securing the international airport there, or attempting to secure it. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, they're going for the whole thing. They're going for a decapitation operation. They're trying to seize Kyiv, kill Zelensky, wipe it out, and take the whole thing. And that really scared me, because that's not the kind of thing. I mean, we haven't seen anything like that in our lifetimes, in my lifetime, of that kind of attack, outside of when the Russians invaded Afghanistan in 1980, 1979. Like, that's exactly what they did. They seized the capital, had, military transports come in, seized the capital, started moving in all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
Took over. And, that really scared me, because they're a nuclear power. We're a nuclear power, and accidents happen. Things, get out of hand. Somebody retaliates. There's a spiral of things that can happen that can lead there. And thankfully, that has never happened, obviously. But that was a big concern of mine at the time. And I was also concerned that Russia would launch large-scale cyber attacks on us, on other Western countries that might come to Ukraine's aid. They did not do that. They continued their same level of that sort of thing, but nothing huge. But those are the things that I remember. And also, it's right during the pandemic, and it's kind of like, do we really need anything else? Right. I figured that they were going to attack when they had all those military units, gassed up, sitting on the borders, engines running. There were satellite pictures, there were press coverage of that. You don't put all that stuff in one place out in the middle of the countryside, have it all armed up, gassed up, ready to go if you're not going to do it,
Yeah. And I mean, we'll get into it a little bit, but there's sort of like a euphemization of everything, so like when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine, it's a special military operation. We're just doing training on these edges here. Don't worry, but we're still doing it pretty openly, and it's obvious what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.